Hey everybody. I just read an article off of one of my favorite resources, Dave Emery and this was on Spitfire. I'm going to leave a link below. This talks about the militia movement, what's going on in the anti-government gunmen who took control of the animal refuge in Oregon on January 2nd. And people are kind of putting this as, fanatics working at the fringes of American politics. But really, the method that Bundy is used to seize the federal property were radical. The ideological roots of the operation were somewhat more, mainstream. By storming the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge and vowing to return it by force or arms, if necessary, to the people of Harney County, Mr. Bundy and his men were echoing the teachings, if not the tactics, of something called the wise use movement, a conservative land doctrine that has been part of the national discourse for nearly 30 years. Again, I'm reading from Dave Emery's The Spitfire, leave a link below. A successor to the Sagebrush rebellions of the 1970s, itself a successor to the anti-national park boomers project of the early 1900s, wise use answers the question of who should own the West by granting moral primacy to natural resource companies and to logging and ranching families like the Bundys, some of which have worked the land since the pioneer expansion. Though composed of many activists and scores of organizations, wise use found its voice in the late 1980s when a timber industry advisor named Ron Arnold published the Wise Use Agenda. The manifesto offered an expansive plan to gut environmental regulation, increase private ownership of public land, and compel the federal government to open its holdings to mining, oil, and logging companies, and to the unrestricted use of off-road vehicles. Mr. Arnold adopted the phrase wise use from Clifford Pinchot, the first head of the United States Forest Service, who said that conservation is the wise use of resources. In 1988, he held a conference bringing together the likes of Exxon and the National Cattlemen's Association with the goal of seeding the West with grassroots companies and groups that could wrest control of federal land and give a local flavor to his Reaganite aims. Arnold sent organizers into distressed rural communities to set up front groups with environmentally friendly sounding names that whipped up hostility against the government. And this was said by Tarso Ramos, the executive director of Political Research Associates, a research group that studies right-wing movements. What resulted, Mr. Ramos said, was a coalition of natural resource companies, property developers, and conservative activists working with a network of community organizations. The coalition achieved success in pushing its agenda. By the early 1990s, politicians friendly to the wise use cause had introduced or passed legislation in nearly 30 states, giving local government and citizens expanded powers to lay claim to federal land. Among those politicians was Representative Helen Chenoweth Hage of an Idaho Republican who became notorious for mocking the Endangered Species Act by holding what she called endangered salmon bakes. There was also Gail Norton, the Interior Secretary under President George W. Bush, who once worked as a lawyer for the Mountain States Legal Foundation, which had billed itself as the litigation arm of Wise Use. The Wise Use crowd got very close to the centers of power, Mr. Ramos said. It also got close to the militia movement, experts say, in 1994. The National Federal Lands Conference, a wise use group that maintained that county governments should control federal land, published an article in its newsletter that bore the title, Why There Is the Need for a Militia in America. Around the same time, wise use rallies often featured pamphlets from groups like the Militia of Montana, said David Helberg, the author of War Against the Greens. Nor was it a coincidence, said James McCarthy, a professor of geography at Clark University, that militia members in camouflage fatigues conducted armed exercises in the very federal forests in New Mexico that the wise use movement was trying to, at the time, pry away from the Washington's control. So the wise use are these guys, these heavily funded Koch Brothers and others, groups giving millions of dollars to this wise use movement, and they're working with the militias, and the militias are doing their own thing, but in the same places that the wise use wants the land. Very interesting. And that's what the point of this is. There was many people who were active simultaneously in the wise use and militia movements and who saw them as different manifestations, Mr. McCarthy said. However, it is also true that the wise use activists were uncomfortable with the militia coming into their fold. In an email titled Wise Use and Property Rights Activists versus Wackos, Mr. Arnold denied that his movement was connected to men like Amon Bundy, who stood down the government 2 years ago in a similar engagement over cattle grazing rights at his father's ranch in Nevada. I don't see any wise use-ish doctrine in anything that's been called patriot militia, Mr. Arnold wrote. And yet the question stands as to why vigilantes with AR-15 rifles have repeatedly confronted the government on behalf of local landowners in the West, a classic wise use campaign principle, if not a wise use tactic. This spring, gunmen from the Oath Keepers militia group, this is very important, this spring, gunmen from the Oath Keepers militia group helped the owners of an Oregon gold mine chase away federal agents who were trying to enforce a stop work order. A few months later, another Oath Keepers tactics team stopped the government from shutting down a mine in a national forest in Montana. Part of the answer is that in a region where the ground itself is largely owned by agencies in Washington, the wise use and militia movements share the same seething resentment at federal overreach, said Jeffrey St. Clair, a journalist who has written about environmental politics in the West for over 30 years. If the wise use movement did not condone or support militias, it created an intellectual framework for militias' operations and has on occasion lent the group's ideological ballast. In some ways, Mr. St. Clair said, the Patriot movement is glomming onto the wise use movement as something that it has a political presence and a real-world power that the Patriot movement has never had. After the Bush years, the wise youth movement lost much of its vibrancy, and even Mr. Arnold acknowledged that it is little known today. But the relationship between activists in suits and angry men with guns continues. Last year, Michelle Fiore, a Republican assemblywoman in Nevada, introduced a bill to prohibit the federal government from owning or managing land in Nevada without the state's consent. Ms. Fiore, as it happens, is also a strong supporter of the Bundys. A month after her bill was introduced, she debated Chris Hayes on MSNBC, live from the standoff at the Bundy Ranch. Now, you may think some of this is just a little bit, okay, well, obviously the wise use campaign and the militias are not directly connected, but you can see some of the people, some of the not people, but some of the ideas and some of the tactics are taken. But here's how Fox News is. I thought this was very interesting in this article as well. And again, I'm going to leave the link below. The right-wing media have been rushing to distance themselves from the Nevada rancher they spent weeks campaigning after Cliven Bundy revealed his racist worldview. But two of Bundy's biggest cheerleaders, Sean Hannity and Fox News, have vested corporate, financial, and political interest in the promotion of Cliven Bundy's anti-government land ownership agenda. Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy became Fox News' favorite folk hero after he refused to comply with court orders directing him to remove his trespassing cattle from public land. Hannity and many other right-wing media rallied around Bundy and his armed supporters as they threatened violence against federal law enforcement officials, attempting to impound Bundy's cattle and collect the $1 million he owed in fines and fees after a decade of noncompliance with the law. Bundy has said he doesn't recognize the existence of the federal government, nor its authority over the land, and has attacked the federal ownership of land, as saying it subverts Nevada's state sovereignty. Now, he didn't. Now, has he gone to the courts? Has he gone through the process? Of course not. Has he tried to organize anything political? Of course not. They want to go right to the gun thing, and when they do go to court, it's to fight whatever fines they have. They don't ever try to, because they don't have to follow the rules. We do. See, we each day have to follow the rules of the federal government every single day, and the state governments, but they don't, because they're above it, because they have money, and they just don't want to. And when it gets in their way, it's bullshit. It's a double standard. What the fuck are you talking about? This is common interest. What the fuck do we care about some cattle ranchers who $1 million cattle ranchers who want to make more money grazing on federal land, for Christ's sake? Hannity has promoted Bundy's anti-government rhetoric, arguing that the federal government owns far too much land, and is pushing Bundy's claim that not only does the federal government not have land ownership authority, but that they don't need or use the land they claim to own. On April 23rd edition of his show, Hannity attacked the government for owning too much land, agreeing with Fox News legal analyst Andrew Napolitano that they do not have the constitutional authority to own any of the land. Throughout the land battle, Hannity continuously argued that the government is irresponsibly fighting for land they have no intended use for, such as building hospitals, schools, or roads. And then this is the greatest thing, and should focus their efforts elsewhere on rapists and murderers and criminals and pedophiles. Of course, because those are the same thing. Fucking God, I hate Sean Hannity. Bundy and Hannity's promotion of state ownership of federal lands gives airtime to an issue that conservatives have long been campaigning for, and have had difficulty getting voters excited about. An issue in line with the land interests of the Koch brothers. Slate reported on April 23rd that the Fox News corporate, financial, and political interests being served by Hannity's promotion of Bundy's lie in the network's connection to the Koch brothers. Bundy's anti-federal agenda is closely aligned with that of Charles and David Koch, major Republican donors who have been pushing for states to gain control over federal lands so they can be sold or leased to people like the Koch brothers in deals. Fox News Network and Sean Hannity have a particular interest in this promotion of realization of such Koch interests because their funding depends on it. Hannity receives major funding in large ad buys from Koch-affiliated Heritage and Tea Party patriots. Hannity's Koch-affiliated funders have a long history of promoting the privatization of public lands and condemning the federal ownership of land. Tea Party groups have supported local efforts to transfer federal lands. Heritage has advocated shrinking the U.S. government controlling by selling its physical assets such as huge swaths of land, especially out west. Heritage was also a loyal promoter of the Federal Land Freedom Act of 2013, advocating for the transfer of federal land management to state regulators for energy resource development. Giving airtime to the issue that is obscure but significant to his conservative funders makes perfect sense for Hannity. Politico reported that Heritage began sponsoring Hannity in 2008, and in 2013, Hannity began advertising for the Tea Party Patriots, lending his name to fundraising drives, hosting its leaders on his radio and Fox News shows, and using Fox airwaves to promote the Tea Party Patriots website, which is all Koch brothers. The Koch brothers have been covertly funding right-wing organizations such as Heritage Action, and the Tea Party Patriots through the nonprofit Business League Freedom Partners, whose tax code status as a trade associate allows the organization to conceal its donors. Freedom Partners is one of the largest donors of conservative groups, and its board has deep ties to the Koch brothers, with many of its members being longtime employees of the Koch Industries and the Charles Koch Foundation. The Koch-funded Freedom Partners made grants of $236 million in 2011 alone. Among many conservative groups, its recipients include Heritage as well as the Tea Party Patriots. Heritage Action received $500,000 in 2011 from the Koch brothers through Freedom Partners, and the additional funds from the Charles Koch charitable foundations in 2012. The Tea Party received over $200,000 from Freedom Partners. The legislative efforts of such groups to transfer control of federal lands to states are nothing more than corporate-backed messaging tools initiated by conservatives like the Koch affiliates. Such efforts are rooted in the interest of the Kochs and other conservative groups to use the land in whichever way is most profitable to them, such as mining, drilling, and other resource extraction. Now, this is relevant because this is who the right wing in this country is, the right-wing conspiracy people are defending. This Cleavon Bundy and the whole Bundy herd of we want to do what we want to do on our federal land. The federal is overreaching it, and they're a bunch of racist, right-wing fucking morons who are probably, in part, being funded by Koch brothers and Koch brothers' interest and are being fueled because the Koch brothers want to initiate this in a way to get the public involved in it. They're never going to get federal lands to, like the article says, mine, drill, make as much money off as they want, unless they get the public involved. And then this is a way to do it. Now, do I think they orchestrated it? Of course not. But this is that hardcore right-wing stupidity that thinks we can do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about, the government is not for us, it's for you. And it's libertarianism, and it's funded from the top. The Tea Party, the hardcore right-wing in this country, Donald Trump, this is privatization gone amok. This is Reaganomics. This is where we are now. And that's what the Bundy thing is, and that's what this recent shooting in Oregon is. These aren't right-wing heroes and martyrs. These are assholes who are literally killing and using guns to stop the federal, so they can use the federal government they can use federal land to have their cattle graze on. and they can use federal land for whatever they want to use it for. I mean, that's what this is about. This isn't civil rights. This isn't people's rights. No one's houses are being taken away. This is about cattle grazing. I mean, do you see? And it's all being generated and funded by the hardcore right wing with this wise use campaign, this wise use idea of, hey, let's take this federal land that's not being used and let's let us use it to make money. And it's not us making it. It's going to be the corporations. It's the Koch brothers who want to take this. And the big, huge corporations who want to pull all of the fucking natural resources out of it and leave us with nothing. And our groundwater soiled and let us absorb the cost. Ask Flint, Michigan how that's working out for them. Thank you for listening very much and have a great day.